The future is here, and it is desperate. We are not talking about flying cars or laser guns. We are talking about survival. This is The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, the most important and perhaps the most terrifying work of science fiction of our time. This is a massive epic novel that asks a simple, terrifying question. What if the climate catastrophe isn't coming? It's already here. The book opens with a terrifying vision of a future that is already too hot to live in. We are immediately introduced to the Ministry for the Future, a global UN-sponsored body based in Switzerland, created with one impossible mandate: to advocate for the world's future generations, whose lives are currently being compromised by our present actions. This is not a story about a single hero, but about a decade-spanning global strategy. We will follow the ministry's leader, Mary Murphy, as she navigates political resistance, global finance, and the deep, cynical inertia of the powerful. We will witness how, faced with unimaginable human tragedy, the ministry is forced to sanction radical, almost unthinkable actions, from eco-terrorism and piracy on the high seas to the invention of an entirely new global currency called the carbon coin. This is a story about the complex, messy, and necessary fight to save the planet, not with optimism, but with sheer political will and desperate, brilliant strategy. Get ready for a blueprint for global survival. Our journey into the near future begins now. The Crisis Point: India and the Heat Dome. The novel begins with a scene of visceral, immediate horror that sets the urgent, brutal tone for the entire book. We are in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh in the near future, where a terrifying phenomenon known as a wet bulb event has occurred. A combination of extreme heat and 100% humidity has created a condition where the human body can no longer cool itself through sweating. Outside temperature becomes literally unsurvivable. The narrative follows a young American aid worker, Frank May, caught in the sudden, unimaginable catastrophe. The power grid fails, air conditioning stops. Millions of people, trapped indoors, perish in the suffocating heat dome within hours. The official death toll reaches an astronomical 20 million. This event is not a distant threat. It is a mass extinction event that occurs suddenly and without warning, demonstrating the irreversible breach of a critical planetary threshold. This catastrophe is the emotional and political genesis of the Ministry for the Future. The sheer scale of the Indian tragedy forces the ministry, based in a quiet, civilized office in Zurich, to abandon its bureaucratic caution. It becomes clear that polite negotiation and incremental changes are useless against an enemy that just killed 20 million people in a single day. Frank May, the sole survivor of his group, is profoundly and permanently traumatized by the experience. He becomes a symbol of the immense pain and rage of the future generations. This trauma drives him to an act that defines the novel. Months after the disaster, Frank tracks down the head of the ministry, Mary Murphy, and takes her hostage. This desperate act is not an attempt to harm her, but a plea, an emotional demand for the ministry to stop negotiating and start fighting. He represents the moral imperative. Mary represents the political reality. Their forced relationship, a political leader haunted by the moral voice of a traumatized victim, becomes the central emotional engine of the novel. The crisis has begun, and polite society is now over. The two pillars: Mary and Frank. This section develops the parallel tracks of political strategy and psychological fallout, represented by the two main figures, Mary Murphy and Frank May. Mary Murphy is the grounded, pragmatic leader of the ministry. Her role is immense. She must navigate the paralyzing skepticism of the United Nations, the greed of global corporations, and the political infighting of national governments, all while attempting to execute the ministry's impossible mandate. She understands that the climate war cannot be won by science alone. It must be won through economics and politics. Her strategy is based on slow, steady application of pressure, the creation of new financial incentives, and the relentless pursuit of legitimacy. She is the embodiment of necessary compromise and institutional patience. Frank May, conversely, represents the explosive, necessary impatience of moral outrage. After his hostage act, Frank becomes an unofficial, unstable conscience for Mary. He is haunted by the faces of the dead, living in a constant state of PTSD. His presence forces Mary and the ministry to constantly ask, is what we are doing enough? Is it fast enough? Frank's arc explores the psychological cost of witnessing the future's catastrophe and the ultimate question of whether radical violence is ever justified when institutional channels fail. He later moves into the shadows, engaging in a dangerous, shadowy form of environmental activism. The ministry's first major action is an aggressive move into geoengineering, a desperate step many climate scientists reject due to unforeseen risks. They begin the controversial process of massive-scale cloud brightening over the Arctic to reflect sunlight and slow the melting of glaciers. This decision highlights the novel's core theme, the necessity of using imperfect, risky, and morally ambiguous solutions to fight an existential threat. The world is running out of clean options. Meanwhile, the psychological toll on Mary grows. She is constantly besieged by lobbyists, denialists, and cynics. She must manage the global outrage over the geoengineering projects while simultaneously negotiating with the very fossil fuel companies that are the source of the problem. Mary realizes the only way to save the planet is to make green energy more profitable than pollution, requiring a fundamental overhaul of the global financial system, a task many dismiss as pure fantasy. Eco-terrorism and the carbon coin. As political will stalls, the inevitable occurs. Radical violence escalates. An underground, shadowy organization begins executing a series of terrifying, highly sophisticated acts of eco-terrorism. Cargo ships powered by heavy fuel oil are mysteriously disabled or sunk on the high seas. Coal-fired power plants are sabotaged. Private jets carrying billionaires are targeted. While the ministry officially condemns the violence, it is heavily implied that Frank May and his radical allies are orchestrating these attacks, or at least that the ministry is strategically turning a blind eye. This chilling development serves a critical strategic purpose. It raises the economic cost of pollution. If shipping costs skyrocket due to piracy, suddenly solar-powered trains become economically viable. The violence, though morally fraught, provides the necessary market shock that polite negotiation could never achieve. The novel forces the reader to grapple with the ethics of using violence as a last resort against planetary destruction. The ministry's response to this chaos is the invention of the carbon coin, C-coin, the single most brilliant and complex idea in the book. Mary and her team introduce the C-coin as a new global currency, backed not by gold or a national government, but by sequestered carbon. Here's how it works. Any country or company that successfully removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through reforestation, direct air capture, or soil management is paid in C-coin. The central banks, threatened by the collapse of the global economy due to climate disaster, are persuaded to accept the C-coin as a reserve currency. Suddenly, cleaning the atmosphere becomes the most profitable industry on Earth. This move circumvents the political deadlock by changing the fundamental rules of the global economy, directly incentivizing sustainable practices over destructive ones. The C-coin is the ultimate application of Mary's thesis. You cannot save the world by being a martyr. You must save it by making the right choice, the cheapest choice. The grand strategies, glaciers, and geoengineering. With the financial system destabilized and partially saved by the carbon coin and the political will galvanized by eco-terrorism, the ministry launches its most massive and complex scientific projects. This section details the scale of engineering required to pull the planet back from the brink. The focus shifts heavily to the world's glaciers, particularly in the Himalayas and Antarctica. The melting of these ice sheets is a global emergency, threatening sea levels and water supplies. The ministry organizes a massive worldwide effort to slow the melt by sending legions of scientists, engineers, and workers to literally preserve the ice. Techniques include pumping meltwater back onto the glaciers to freeze, covering ice sheets with insulating blankets, and even using massive airships to spray sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere to simulate volcanic cooling. The project to save the world's mountains becomes a massive economic driver, providing millions of green jobs across the globe and utilizing the power of the newly minted sea coin. However, these grand strategies face enormous political and social resistance. Geoengineering is met with protests. People fear that tampering with the atmosphere will lead to unforeseen catastrophes, e.g., perpetual global drought or famine. Furthermore, the shift away from fossil fuels results in massive disruption and unemployment in old industry hubs. Mary, utilizing the political leverage gained from the sea coin, engages in complex international negotiation. She brokers deals to forgive the debts of developing nations, who are disproportionately suffering the worst effects of climate change, in exchange for their commitment to massive reforestation and clean energy adoption. The novel highlights that global salvation requires a radical restructuring of power, finance, and justice, not just carbon capture. The fight against climate change is revealed to be, at its heart, a fight against global economic inequality. The sheer scope of this effort underscores the depth of the crisis and the revolutionary changes necessary for survival. The long road to stability, the new world. The final section is not a triumphant, immediate victory, but the depiction of a slow, messy, and hard-won return to stability and hope. The ministry's strategies, the sea coin, the geoengineering, the debt forgiveness, and the terror campaign have worked, but not perfectly. The climate has stabilized, global temperatures are slowly falling, and the catastrophic tipping points have been avoided, though the world is permanently changed. The most profound change is the social and ethical shift. The world moves toward a philosophy of half-Earth, designating vast, protected zones for non-human life, a conscious recognition that human economic activity must be curtailed to preserve the biosphere. Society begins to value the quality of life, leisure, community, clean environment, over pure capitalist growth, GDP. The emphasis shifts from production to maintenance and care. Frank May, having survived his time in the shadows, finds a form of redemption not through forgiveness, but through integration into the community. He dedicates himself to quiet, constructive environmental work, embodying the shift from destructive rage to constructive action. The novel concludes by showing the sheer number of small, incremental, often bureaucratic battles that made the difference. Salvation was not the result of a single technological silver bullet, but of millions of simultaneous, imperfect political and economic choices. The world is not a utopia, but it is survivable. The ultimate message of the Ministry for the Future is a complex one. It argues that the crisis will require everything: the quiet patience of politicians like Mary, the aggressive innovation of economists, the terror of unseen vigilantes, and the deep, persistent trauma of survivors like Frank. It is a powerful affirmation that the future is still in doubt, and its survival will depend on us finally choosing collective action over individual gain and long-term justice over short-term profit. The future has been saved, but the battle to maintain it has just begun.